And they had the 1968 urban renewal plan there that someone had finally just gotten around to read, and it called for the raising of the entire neighborhood and replacement with high-density, high-rise apartments. And somehow no one had paid any attention to it. And so they're going to tractor us all out. We'll be gone. And we met with Fraser and said, you know, can we stop this? You know, can we prevent this from happening? I mean, we all live here. We really like it. It's really nice. And Fraser said, you know, well, I'm certainly in sympathy with you guys, but you know, this is, I remember the quote, this is bought and paid for clear up to Washington, D.C. And it was, and the local developers, which are Keith Heller, an economics professor at the university, and Gloria Siegel, the daughter of strong socialists, and the wife of a doctor, had put together this huge development with $55 million worth of federal subsidy. And this was a big amount in 1968. $55 million in 1968 is probably, you know, $1.5 billion now. So we're talking about a serious money. That was federal subsidies through the Newtown program, and the silent partner in the company was Henry McKnight, who had been the college roommate of George Romney Sr., who was the Secretary of Housing at the time. And we thought about that, and we said, you know, we should do it anyway. We should organize the neighborhood anyway. And if we're gonna lose, at least we can give them as much trouble as possible, so they won't do it to another neighborhood elsewhere. And in a way that was going into it with knowing we had already probably lost was a blessing in disguise, because no tactic was too gross. You know, if we figured we have nothing to lose, and we set about to organize the neighborhood. And the couple of the first things we organized was the Cedar Riverside People Center. And we got space in the Andrew Presbyterian Church there, and Joyce took over the organizing of that. And we started out with a free medical clinic and counseling and veterinary, because everyone had dogs running all over the neighborhood. And the People's Pantry, which was the bulk buying of brown rice and stone ground whole wheat flour that was operating out of Diane and Alvin's back porch, moved in to the People's Center, and so that was the community center. And then there was a coffee house on Cedar Avenue called the Cafe Extempore that actually had been started as a social service, and run by a nonprofit called Young Adult Centers in Corpus, something like that. And Bill was on the board, and he realized that Young Adult Centers was working for the developers, and they were furthering that agenda. You know, and the coffee house extent was a lovely place. It had a great following there, but the nonprofit board was promoting the destruction of the neighborhood. Bill said, let's organize our own coffee house. And Bill put together his own nonprofit, which was his colleagues at who were university chaplains at the university. There was Bob Orodnik was the Methodist chaplain, and Russ Hatton was the Episcopal chaplain, Bill's boss. And he put together a nonprofit organization called the West Bank Campus Ministries. And what the West Bank Campus Ministries was going to do was going to operate a coffee house to minister to the West Bank. It was unclear what the ministry was going to be, but it was going to be the minister to the West Bank. And we were a 501c3. We were able to take donations. We raised, it was Bill. I wasn't involved at this time, actually. Bill and I was peripherally involved. What had happened was back in March when he first put this whole thing together. We're into the summer now. I was working for Head Start, and the school year is over. And at the same in March we had put in for a community organizing grant for that the UAW would offer grants for community organizing. And amazingly enough, we got one, and we sat around the table and they're looking there, and Steve is working with Fraser, Bill is and everyone looks at me. I said, you have a degree in psychology and sociology, and you are not working. You are it. And so I helped Joyce at the People's Center, and I helped Bill with the cafe, and was paid to do so. And I neglected to inform the unemployment people. I was collecting unemployment from Head Start, since Head Start had closed for the. I neglected to tell them, so I was collecting both checks. How are they going to know this check is coming from the UAW in Washington, D.C.? But they sent me a 1099. Now, that was another story, but at any rate, the Mel Leslie, another iconic, he was in the Dinkytown sphere back in the 1960s, ran a coffee house in Stadium Village, not quite Dinkytown, called the Coffee Break. And that's where Kerner Ray and Glover achieved their first fame at the Coffee Break. I think the powers that be eventually closed Mel down, and he had rented this space on 19th and Riverside. It's the West Bank, and as I say, the owners, and it was more than just the developers at this point. It was Augsburg College, it was the hospitals, and it was the university. It all divvied up the land, and between those institutions, they had bought just about everything, and the development wasn't going through immediately. It was in phases, so they were renting it out fairly cheaply, and it had to be cheaply because they weren't doing any maintenance. And so Mel had rented the space kitty corner from the Viking Bar, and he always hoped to open a coffee house there, and sort of fitted it out, and but the city was never going to give him a permit. So he did a deal with Bill, and Bill, or I should say West Bank Campus Ministries, paid Mel off for the improvements that he has done, and assumed the lease, and was also able to apply for a restaurant permit. And so Zach Zaneski and Andy Duchesne spent the summer making the building habitable, and it came around to September, and it was possible to open it up. It was fairly funky, but it had a functional kitchen and a coffee bar and a big music room. And so that's really all we needed. And both my unemployment checks and my grant from the UAW was running out, and Bill realized that he had a bunch of people signed up who were willing to work there for minimum wage or less even. But he didn't have anyone who wanted to run it. So he asked me if I'd manage it. And so my checks had run out, and I said, sure, I'll manage it. And arranged for me to meet with all the Dinkytown coffee house owners, the three people who had owned the Scholar, and Mel Leslie to give me insight. And I can't say that I learned anything from them, but it was a fun afternoon hanging out with those guys. But and we opened up with the staff, and it was, you know, a group of people that had coalesced, not necessarily around the cafe, around the coffee house, or you know, as I was saying, it was the People's Pantry people. There's all these connections. It was, you know, it was 1970. It was Earth Day. You know, the connections were happening, and the community was being built, and the cafe was designed to be a community institution around which we could organize the resistance to the development. But first and foremost, it had to be a coffee house. They didn't even know what to name it, and Bill's suggestion was, let's call it the Genuine Original Old Time Bohemian and Leftover Beatnik Last Stand Cafe, and which you can just shorten to the Last Stand Cafe. No one likes that too well, you know. And furthermore, this is not supposed to be the last stand. This is a new beginning, right? So we were wondering what to call it, and we were sitting around there, and a guy named Gray, who was a SDS guy, came in, and we were saying, what should we call this joint? He said, why don't you just call it the Riverside Cafe? And I said, well, you know, that's good, but there's the symbolic value isn't right, because there used to be a Riverside Cafe 3 blocks down there, which was tractored out by the developers. And we thought about it. We said, well, why not call it the New Riverside Cafe? So there it was. And the cafe ladies certainly quickly, you know, it took about a year, but it turned it into a totally vegetarian operation. And Bill Bill wanted to serve Perrier. He wanted to be able to come over there in the morning and have a continental breakfast, which was a croissant and a bottle of mineral water and a glass of orange juice. And no one was going to pay for water in a bottle. That is just ridiculous, Bill, and we ain't going to do that. And Bill said, well, then I'll buy it. And he went over to Lund's and bought a case of Perrier, and brought it over, and he would drink that case by himself, one bottle every morning, and pay for it. And when that case was out, he would go buy another one. And the idea of paying money for water in a bottle was beyond the pale at that point. And it was not very long into it that it's not more than a couple months that we realized we're not making anywhere near enough money to pay all the people who were working there. And it became incumbent upon me as the manager to fire two of my friends. And we discussed it. He said, well, you got to do it. You're the manager. And so I said, all right, I will do that. I will do it. I will fire Irving and Betty. But that's the last time, because I'm also firing me. And I ain't going to be the manager anymore. And we're going to run this as a collective. And it's going to be a collective, and we can do this. And I know how to do it because I just lived on a caboose for 6 months. And the collective was founded, and it was, since most of the people were already living together in a couple, 3 rental properties around the West Bank, it was easy to basically, the way it ran down is the cafe paid the rent on the houses, and the cafe maintained a charge account at North Country Co-op, which is just also formed out of the same general milieu. People's Pantry morphed out of the People's Center basement into North Country Co-op in the storefront on the corner. And so there was this community developing all around, which I think probably by 1975, I would say involved 2,000 or 3,000 people, and maybe up to 10,000 fellow travelers, running a totally alternate economy. And that lasted until 1975, when the co-op wars took place and took down that organization. But in 1970, it all seemed so simple, and that cafe will pay the rent on the houses. If you need food, eat at the cafe, or you rent or charge it at the co-op. And if you need gas for the trucks, I think originally there was probably about 12 people and an equal number of trucks, all doing cafe business, of course. And if you need gas for that, took that out of the till, and man, it worked great. And we threw all the trucks and all the clothing and all the people in one big pile, and paid for it all out of the till of the cafe. And in fact, it worked so well that by 1970, 72 or 73 maybe, we thought, man, this is really working well. How can we take it beyond us? How can we move it out there? And the way we decided was, well, how do we operate here? How do we operate on the basis of from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. That was how we operated. And he said, how about we'll stop charging prices. We'll say, eat the food you need and pay what you can afford to eat for that. And we ran the cafe like that for 3-4 years. And that worked well too. And so there was and of course, as I said, it didn't exist in a vacuum, because there's this whole community, and that eventually grew to 15 co-ops around the city, around the state, the all co-op assembly, coordinating it all, all of it, not all of them were straight out communes as we were, and we were successful enough so at the height of the commune by say 74, we owned 2 houses. The commune owned 2 houses in town and a farm in Wisconsin, and 15 vehicles, and all supported. It wasn't just the. By that time, it wasn't just the Riverside Cafe. We also had 3 other businesses which ran out of the phone of the cafe, which we did charge prices for. One of which was catering, and that's how we ended up doing your first wedding. And that was, I say, a typical job. And what we had a big 1953 school bus fitted out with the stove and refrigerator and everything. And we also had the 1943 Dodge Power Wagon, big old military truck, painted red and black at that time. And so we would cater hippie weddings in the country. And we would put tables and chairs and fill it all up in the Power Wagon. And we'd cook the food in the bus on the way to the farm. And that was Funny Foods Catering, was what the name of that operation. And we also, since we had all these old trucks they were always busily keeping running, we figured we may as well fix everyone else's too. And so we had a mechanical business called Ace Truck Parts, and we fixed everyone else's. And as I say, we charged prices for these. And the third was, since we had all the trucks, we had a moving company, the iconic hippie movers, and we'd show up with the trucks and move you. And there are innumerable stories on all of those, as entertaining as the wedding was. and I could go on forever and ever. But so you had this community of co-ops and collectives and freaks, what can I tell you, all living in various stages in non-hierarchical social structure. They all had the business, the co-op, the cheese rustlers, the Red Star Herbs, there's several mechanical operations, and all operating on a joint and handshake. So when the Stalinist political cult tried to take over this whole thing, which was 1975 into 76. The co-op wars, where you had it really was a political cult, and they wanted to take control of the co-ops, the warehouse that serviced them, and the whole thing. And they're willing to do it by throwing everyone else out, throwing all the hippies out and saying, this is our store now. And they said, you can't. And they said, we got to get rid of this organic stuff. The working class doesn't like all this organic. We want canned goods and white bread and breakfast cereal, and they found adherents, and there was literally it came to fisticuffs from time to time for control of the large system of co-ops. And of course, when that happened, they'd come over and try to throw out the people who were running the co-op, and cops would be called, and the cops would say, who owns this place? Who owns this? Who owns it? And they said, we do. No, we do. And so that necessitated all of a sudden ownership. Boards of directors and bylaws and articles of incorporation and all of the above, and so that was the end of the 5 years of the hippie underground economy. But it was great while it lasted. It was great while it lasted. It really was. I have to say that there have been times in my life when I've been happier, and there have been times in my life when I've been more creative, and but I don't think there's any time where I had any more fun.
Let me just probe a couple of things. You're talking about the scope of this, okay? The scope of it, the number of people involved.
Yeah.
You mentioned about 3,000. I wanted to see how that was divided up. And was starting out as something that was sort of had its center at the new Riverside Cafe.
Yeah, there was one of the centers. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't. The whole idea was decentralization, and the scope of it. Well, you have to figure that that at its height, the cafe was probably 30 people living in two houses that we owned, and a couple more that were rented, and we also had the farm in Wisconsin. And so with the there were at that time probably around the state there were probably about 15 food co-ops that were staffed in various ways. They may not have all been communes or collectives, but there were cooperatives that basically a non-hierarchical approach to management, and not only management but to life in general. And these were, in many ways, there was easily that many or more. I would say during those times, I would just say there are 30 or 40 communal farms in the countryside that I can think of. I can started out in the late 60s. Georgeville was in the main commune. The cafe had the farm with Rod Belleville that came out. Don Hastings was his brother. The North Country Co-op farm was just down the road, and this is just in the area of Boyceville, Wisconsin, and there was half a dozen communal farms in that area alone, and all feeding into this co-op community, if you can call it that, in the cities. And in addition to so we're talking, say 15 farms, 15 co-ops, and the warehouse, of course, and to one degree or another, all these people were living communally, cooperatively, in houses all over the city, not just the farms. And so were their friends, who may not specifically work at a co-op or be on the farm, but they're living the lifestyle. And that's where I say there are, where I come up with, say, 3,000. And, but then there are all the people who came in and listened to the music at the cafe, and the 400 bar across the street, and to the boogies at the People Center, and at the Firehouse, and shopped at all the co-ops. That's where the 10,000 comes from.
I got to pursue one particular interest of mine for a second,
Sure.
which is that right across from the New Riverside, across the street, is Kiefer Court.
Is what?
Kiefer Court,
Right.
it's a Chinese bakery. And I know, because I interviewed the daughter there, that they were thinking in a lot the same way. But was there any connection? I mean, was there any communication?
Well, there was. I mean, we figured, they're Asian food people. We get stuff from them. We'd go over there and get their stuff to eat, and we were there. The Riverside Cafe was before they were. When the Riverside Cafe opened, the only place where you could find bean sprouts in commercial quantities is going over to Kwangtung, the Chinese cafe on Lake Street. They would do bean sprouts for us. And Kiefer Court finally, they came in. So there's the co-ops, but there were beans. So we went over there and they thought we were funny hippies. So.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how parallel your thinking.
Well, of course, and we realized that it's because they were the extended family, we were the extended family.
Yeah. And from the standpoint of cheap meals on the West Bank,
Yeah.
they've maintained that tradition. They're the only place on the West Bank where you eat for $3 well.
Yeah.
Now,
when we first started out, we were charging prices, I believe, for a bowl of rice and veggies, it was 35 cents.
I remember those days. Now,
and it seemed like it had been going on for so long that we, if we wanted to, we knew how we would print our own money. And we would put on the $20 bill we'd put a lid of dope. On a $100 bill we'd put a '63 Chevy, and like that.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, you were in some sense the father of the feast. I mean, it was your suggestion about the initial New Riverside that got non-hierarchical into some brains.
Well, it was the spur of the moment, because I knew I wasn't gonna fire anyone anymore.
I see. So, you just sort of what kinds of ideas were you bringing? I mean, from the new school, all of these European eggheads fleeing for their lives, and the kibbutz. I mean, what kind of ideas, what kind of stuff were you bringing to the West Bank?
Well, I think it was not so much bringing to the West Bank as just tapping into what was already there. Having spent time on the kibbutz, which was in 1968. This is when Israel was still a socialist country, and the kibbutz was the building block of the socialist society, and the place I was on was 30 years old, an agricultural community of 400 people, holding all property in common, having communal child care for all the children are raised communally, and quite literally, if there was no private property. People had their houses and their furniture, but this was all from the kibbutz. And it was the idea that knowing that not only can be done, but it's how easy it really is to do, and it was. We got there, Barbara and I. We ended up coming from Greece by way of Cyprus to Haifa, and we had run out of money. We had no money at that point. We knew that there was that you could get work on a kibbutz. Not only could you get, this was all over the underground. There were people traveling back and forth, and we would share this information. And not only would you'd get a place to live and a job, and you'd get paid $30 a month too. And that was a lot of money in 1968. Not a lot of money, but it was 2 months. 2 months, and for Barbara and I, we'd have $120. That would be enough to get us and the motorcycle back to Europe. And but we ended up staying 6 months. But we got there with nothing, and they said, I went to the office in Tel Aviv of the kibbutz movement, and they said, fine. And they said, we have openings on 2 kibbutzes. I said, give me the closest one, because I don't know if I have enough gas to get there. And we got there, and we had a piece of paper. This is where the new volunteers. They said, fine. And he turned to a guy who was, wearing the kibbutz work outfit. Was up filling with some electric stuff on a power pole. Said, Phil, these are new volunteers. Is there a room down in your house? And he said, yeah. He says, well, would you take him down? And so we got, and so he climbed down off the power pole, and it turned out, I thought that he was an Israeli, because his English was really bad, and the Israelis at that point, having been a mandate, spoke with an English accent. I could tell there was an English accent, but I didn't know, I had trouble understanding. It turns out he was somewhere in the Midlands. It was terrible. He was another hippie volunteer, and been there for, I don't know, 3-4 months. And we had our own, all the houses were single story, with tile roofs, and broken up into 3 little blocks of 3 apartments. And we got our own apartment, and there are the other mostly Englishmen, a couple South Africans. These are all the hippies who are volunteer workers on the kibbutz. A lot of them. There's a constant stream of folks going from between New Delhi and London, carrying hash back and forth a lot. And a lot of people would stop off and work on a caboose for 2 or 3 months on the way there. But mostly Europeans, and and I was bumming cigarettes, and they said, don't you have any? I said, man, we got nothing. And they said, well, go down to Rivka to the store, and we'll get you outfitted. And I said, wow, store, man, it's not going to help us. We don't have any money. He said, no, this is the kibbutz, man. It's all free. I said, so we walked down to the store. They say, Rivka, these are the new volunteers. Set them up. He says, need work clothes? Yeah. Several suits of kibbutz blue work clothes, work boots. Yeah. Here they are. Smoke. Yeah. Couple cartons, cigarettes, drink. Yeah. Some wine. We walked out of there like this. And I realized that the whole thing was operated by consensus, and there it was 500 people, 2.5 generations. It's been going that way for 30 years, and it all works. One of the differences was, that I first noticed, is that you could pursue your individual interests, and if you need money to do that, you could come to the kibbutz meeting, and everyone was there. Everyone was in the dining hall. Everyone ate communally, so there were people working in the kitchen. You didn't have to spend time preparing your food, but you could come to I say, I'm really into photography. I would like a camera. I said, sure, send in a camera. And you come back a little, I'm really into it. How about a dark room? And that's one. The other one, I'm a potter. I would like a potter's wheel. Someone else, interestingly enough, there was a guy there who was from Moroccan. He was a Sephardi, Arabic Jew from North Africa. Somehow he got interested in the theater of Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht. He got into that, and he said, I'm really into it. I'd like some albums and a phonograph. I sent in a phonograph. A little while later, he came. So I'm still really in it. How about a piano so I can try to play it? Send in a piano. And the point was, it wouldn't occur to everyone to say, I need a phonograph, and I need the camera, and I need the potter's wheel, and, everyone was from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And it was certainly up to the individuals to decide what their need was, and the group respected that. And I saw that working, and it had obviously been working incredibly well for 30 years. And they were prosperous and happy and well adjusted. Lately, there are books coming out deconstructing the kibbutz and saying, and I did know the language, so it wasn't that I was not under. I didn't tell them that when I first started. I did know the. I did know the language, so I could understand what was going on better than a lot of the volunteers. When I got there, I didn't say I was Jewish, but tell them I was Jewish, and they didn't ask. And they're always they're always trying to get the volunteers to stay around, and they wanted to teach them Hebrew. And they said, come to the Hebrew classes. Come. And they're always saying, in a nice way. It was not a real pressurized deal. They said, why don't you come to Hebrew class? Finally, after a couple months, I said, no, I'm not going to go. Well, why not? Because I can already speak it. Well, so you Jewish? Yeah. Well, you didn't tell us. You didn't ask. And luckily, no one said, and you've been listening to our conversations all this time also. But it was because it wasn't a big thing with them. But what I learned there more than anything else is not only how well it can work, but how easy it is to do. I don't know if you could do it now, because the the zeitgeist and people's Weltanschauung is so different now than it was then. Even there, I mean, what, in 10 years after that, or maybe only 8 years after that, say, that was 68, say 76, 77, the Labor government was voted out, and they got conservative government in there for the first time in its history. And in 1980, or early 80s, and they had a conservative government now then for 4 or 5 years. Reagan and Thatcher were busily privatizing the world. They told the Israelis that, you know, we'll help you out, but you got to get rid of the socialism shit. And, you know, for the first time in Israeli history, they had a government that said, we'd be more than happy to. And that was pretty much the kibbutzim are not, they're more like bedroom communities. They're not working communes of various kinds as they were from 1880 to 1980. But it was amazing to see it work, to live in the middle of it. And I had that confidence, and I think more than anything else, that's what I passed on to my tribal brothers and sisters.
Bravo. I wanted to know what the Dire Wolf Gang was and who they were, because that came up, and it had a particular period of time around it. And
yeah, well, when the New Riverside Cafe and its non-profit arm, which is West Bank Campus Ministries, ceased to be a business and became a commune, for lack of a better word. And it wasn't just the hippies at the cafe. The West Bank Campus ministers looked at us and they said, "This is amazing." And Bob Aradnick, the Methodist chaplain, put together a middle-class, middle-aged commune in Dinkytown in the 70s for he and his family and 3 others, I think, decided that looks really interesting. I think we'll live communally too. And but so when this change happened, and it happened fairly quickly. It was, as I say, it was surprisingly easy. We are basically living more or less together already, and it was just a matter of saying, we're going to do this. And we had to find a name for ourselves. Who are we? Who are we? And we took the name from the Grateful Dead song, "The Dire Wolf." That we were all at that time great aficionados of the Grateful Dead. The Dire Wolf. When I awoke, the Dire Wolf, 600 pounds of sin, was sitting at my window. All I said was, "Come on in." In the backwoods of Venereal, the wolves are running around. The dire wolf collects his due. Well, the chorus is, "Don't murder me. Please don't murder me. I beg of you, please don't murder me." And Zach drew up a logo with the wolf and in a circle. When we first started out, the cafe, we always had to have other things going to have money in besides the cafe. Although the cafe was the main one, and when we started out, even before we officially collectivized, we were selling records, and we hooked up with a record producer named George Hansen, who recorded, he recorded Leo Kottke, and he recorded John Colston and Soupy Milton and the Sorry Mothers, and but Leo Kottke was first, and he was just a guy. He didn't have any distribution or anything like that, and so we sold the records for him. We took out an ad in Rolling Stone, got a post office box, and we took in the checks and sent out the records, and so originally that entity became was the Dire Wolf record label, and we brought out one pretty good record on our own from on the Dire Wolf label called it was a summit meeting of the local bluegrass masters at the time at the cafe, and that was it's the occasion of a well-known fiddler who's, I think, getting out of the service. His name was Craig Rubel, and they put together Craig Rubel, a fiddler, and Steve Gamble playing guitar, and he's more famous as the Caldecott-winning children's book artist. Gamble on guitar, and Ron Colby on banjo, and Rod Belleville, I think, playing fiddle and mandolin, and we recorded it at the cafe.
And were you doing bass?
No, I wasn't. In fact, I wasn't even playing bass at that time. I was a folky, jug bandy banjo picker type of thing, which I kept on doing back until about the 1980s. I started. By the time I got to my 40s, it felt like I played every folk, country, bluegrass song that had ever been written, never would be written, and I was even on my listening, I'd returned to my beatniks roots and was listening to mostly blues and jazz, a lot of jazz at the time, and so I wasn't playing, and it's like a hole in my life, and I said, I'm not a good enough banjo player, so I can play blues or jazz on the banjo. It's a pretty niche, folky instrument, just the way it's built. People do it. They're incredible jazz banjoists, but only a few, and I'm not one of them. But the guitar didn't do a whole lot for me either, as a matter of fact. And it was Steve Kimmel, who was a jazz piano player, drummer, vibes player, he's a triple threat guy. He suggested, well, why don't you play bass? Why don't you try bass? And I said, well, that sounds like fun. And he said, well, and I just happen to have an acoustic bass guitar which you can borrow. And so I borrowed the guitar, and it was an instant fit. And I liked it well enough, so I went out and immediately got a Japanese copy of a Fender Precision Electric bass. And I think I played played electric bass, mostly just played the blues for 10 years. And my friend from the cafe days, the great jazz musician Eddie Berger, was running a jazz workshop through adult education down at South High, and he said, "You come down to the class, man. You'd like it." He was after me for a while. I said, "I don't know, my jazz is hard," and he said, just come to the class. So I did, and it turned out to be actually half the people were there to study jazz improvisation with Ed Berger, as the prospectus said, and the other half were Eddie's old friends who just wanted to come and jam. And it was part of the adult education at South High, and Eddie would make everyone get a real book, which is a book of charts of music, and he would pound out the tunes on the piano to keep everybody on pitch and on time, and then play it down, and then he'd point to someone, and every time they'd do the solo. And as I say, half the people were students there who wanted to learn how to do this, and the other half of the people were Eddie's old friends who just wanted to jam. And so I picked up enough there to do that. To get a old upright bass and start working out on jazz, and took some lessons, and I still do it, not just jazz. And I left my last job as a community organizer. Actually, at that time I was an executive director of the same type of NGOs that I worked for as an organizer. And when I was 55, so I could play music and write stories, and now it's 20 years. I've been able to do that for 20 years. So I can sit here and tell you stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'm getting the picture that once you set the various enterprises in the direction they were already intending to go, which was the sort of kibbutz direction, then you were hanging around for until that got throttled by earlier stuff, or by the kind of political stuff that came later.
Well, two things. Yeah, I mean, when I say we, I mean the collective we, the all co-op assembly, the People's Warehouse, all the co-ops and the community, as it were, hung on till 1970, 75, and that's when, well, for me personally, my wife at the time, was my second wife, was pregnant, and she didn't want to raise a kid in a commune. And so I said, fine, I will. We can keep the house, get out of the commune, and they should be friends and everything. But we do that. At the same time, though, we had this political cult called the Co-op Organization, who really did fancy themselves, it seems hard to believe, fancy themselves as Stalinists, who were literally trying to take over the co-ops one by one. And at the Riverside Cafe, that meant not only bylaws and articles of incorporation and boards of directors, but charge prices and all of the above. And we're going from living communally and paying the rent or the payments on the houses, to start paying salaries again, punching the clock. And the people, in all these organizations, there is always a percentage of people, our brothers and sisters essentially, who went for this, who got involved with this cult. And we do. We don't want to do this hippie stuff anymore. We want to punch the clock and have organized shifts to be responsible for, and hourly wages. We will be collectively managed, but we want to be a real business. And and at that point I wasn't in it because I love food service. I was in it for the social experiment. If that's what it was going to be, just food service, I wasn't interested in hanging around.